This is Humankind, and you might think, what is Humankind? Well, it's what you're looking at. It's an upcoming 4X game developed by Amplitude Studios. That's the group that makes Endless Legend and Endless Space. Essentially, a very similar 4X style of video game, comparison to none other than Sid Meier's Civilization, right? In Humankind, players lead their civilization across six major eras, starting from the nomadic age. As you can see on screen, literally nothing. Very early civilization, right at the dawn of humankind. You develop your civilization throughout, choose how to expand, where you want cities and military outposts and units. You capture some of the map, and gradually the map is generated and created as you explore it. One of the most distinguishing elements of Humankind is that within each era, the player selects a civilization type based on historical societies, but unique to each era. So you might start off and choose an ancient civilization like Egypt, and then as you're moving your way through, you might move through into the modern era and choose industrialized Britain or something like that. So, unlike civilization, in Humankind, you can much more dynamically shape what you're playing throughout. You can start off the early game in the early eras as a nomadic tribe who eventually turns and adopts ancient Egyptian culture, right? You flourish along the river with aqueducts, so on and so forth, and powerful military chariots, right? But then as you move through the game and move through eras, you can choose to adopt the unique abilities or features or characteristics of an entirely different culture. A culture that instead, say, favors scientific discovery over all else and ignores military. And all of these cultures are based on real life, on the real world. Just like in the same way that Sid Meier's Civilization, that one of the reasons why we love it so much is because it caters to real world history and real world empires. Humankind does the exact same thing, but in each playthrough you get to experience so many more, but in a way that is so delicately balanced and threaded throughout the game that it gives it this unique sense of history, but not always with simulation. It's not a historical simulator like Sid Meier's Civilization in many ways could be in theory, right? In practice, of course, neither of them are. But in theory, Civilization could be. Because it's linear. You choose a civilization, you play as it, you remain as it. Up until recently, there hasn't really been ways to divert your culture into actually properly into another civilizations. You know, if you think about culture victory in Civ, you just have to exceed their sort of numerical value associated with culture, and your tourism value has to exceed theirs, and then that's it, you're done, and you can, of course, there are multipliers that affect that, but fundamentally it's quite simple, and it's quite rudimentary, actually. You just need your number to be higher than theirs, and that's how your culture beats theirs. Whereas in Humankind, not only are the in-game cultural dynamics much more fluid in a way that religion might spread in Civilization, but also the more broader way that you choose whole cultures to influence your entire era, in a way choosing whole civilizations to influence your entire era. It's much more dynamic and much more unique, and I think that something really needs to be said for just how well, I believe, Amplitude Studios, through the backing of Sega and I'm sure many others, have produced a title here that is both historically accurate and deeply and richly historically inspired, yet able to not be rigidly bound by some of the limitations of historical simulation. And I think that's what Humankind has going for it really well. And as I reflect on that more, I'm going to now shift the conversation a lot more heavily onto what I've just discussed in the last 2 minutes, and a lot less factual like it was, say, at the beginning of the video when I was talking about what the game actually is. I think to build on that sort of notion of it being a historical simulation, historically accurate but not a simulation, I think we also have to remember, of course, that the developers, Amplitude Studios, just like Firaxis, are also a corporation, right? This is also a game designed to sell, and it will likely have DLC packages in future that sell, or a season pass that sells, and we have to keep that in mind when I'm talking about this, that this is still being produced from a very corporate and commercial lens. But, that being said, and as someone who's played the two open devs, but not played the game since. I played it, for sort of a few weeks, and then there were a few months, and then I played it for a few weeks again, and now I'm waiting for August 17th when it releases. I can safely say that it really feels like they've listened. They've really listened to us. They've been incredibly responsive, not only between the open devs, but also the developers themselves have done live streams since. There was one just the other day where they talked about what they've done in the game since, and really impressive. It's really impressive what they're doing. It does feel like, in many ways, that they are crafting this, perhaps, maybe not fully with love in every aspect, in part it's commercial, but definitely it's being crafted with a sense of genuine passion. The game is being crafted with such a sense of genuine passion, and it shows. It shows in their ability to respond to community feedback, and in how polished the experience is. Actually it is an experience that I think has been produced with love. I'll go as far to say that. I also think that the overall game and the way that they've laced those choosing a cultural civilization in each sort of era helps to really drive an experience that is so cohesive and full and rich and driven by a storyline like no other. This storyline or this narrative is so strong. And really, I think that Humankind tells a story or a narrative in this way you can see on screen with these dynamic events and so many other things and so many other features that really draw you in really as well as a game in any other genre could, because you're telling your own story as you go, and it's dynamic and it's responsive and it's inclusive, and the narrative is also, just to throw another buzzword at you, cohesive. It's so cleverly intertwined throughout the game, through every unit, every piece of research, every technology, every cultural inspiration, every guiding aspect of your civ through era stars and all sorts of unlocks combine to allow Humankind to tell really unique stories. I mean, look at it. It's just, it really does have a depth to it, and a narrative that I think draws a really great balance between something like Civilization, which is relatively linear, great, don't get me wrong, but relatively linear, and something like, say, Stellaris, for anybody who's played that, which has a much stronger storytelling narrative to it. And I think that Humankind has that as well. I think that overall, the game is not too complex, but certainly I found it a little difficult to understand. Even now, I don't feel like I've comfortably come to grasps with how it works after having logged a day or two in it. I still feel like there's lots for me to learn. And I've played Endless Space and Endless Legend a little bit before as well, so I had that going for me too. That being said, I feel like overall the game is quite sort of a safe space. It feels open. Look at it. It feels open and colourful and sort of punchy in a way that you kind of feel like you can just give it a go. It's a safe space not only to explore a dynamic narrative of human history, but just to explore the mechanics of the game, I think. It's not too bloated with complexity, but certainly there are many, many, many ways that became apparent to me that you could really develop some interesting, detailed, and complex strategy. So I think it strikes a really great balance. It's fluid. It provides influenceable cultures. It's not too bloated with unnecessary complications, but it is necessarily complex and driven by deep narratives. In case you can't tell, I'm a little bit objectively and subjectively excited for Humankind. I think this is going to be a really well-polished experience that players of 4X games will enjoy regardless of their background. But I think players of Civ will really enjoy this game too. I'm looking forward to it coming out, hopefully, after a series of delays, on August 17th, 2021. Thank you so much for joining me today, and until next time, take care.